I should add another parallel. Rothbard, of course, was also a member of the Rand Circle, though expelled when he refused to demand to convert his wife to atheism or divorce her. It was only a few years following the Gold article that Greenspan angled his way into the Nixon campaign of 1968, taking the job of coordinator of economic policy research. He began a shuttle back and forth between New York City and Washington that would define the rest of his life. In 1970, his mentor Burns was sworn in as the head of the Fed, and here is where Greenspan set his sights on that position as his lifetime goal. Every choice he made after this point was dedicated to that. All the while, he maintained his high public profile, making as many as 80 speeches a year and pulling in huge consulting fees, while otherwise pretending to live a monk-like existence, studying charts and tables and doling out bits of advice and wisdom for high dollars. Despite the personality cult he was building, his predictions were almost always wrong. Let me give only the most famous example. On January 7th, 1973, the New York Times featured his picture with a spread on brilliant market forecasters. He was quoted as follows: "It's very rare that you can be as unqualifiedly bullish as you can now." 4 days later, the market peaked and bottomed out 46% lower 1 year later. This was typical for him, somehow able to build a reputation as a prophet while being wrong. His method was always the same, using high-flown rhetoric and obscure language while dissembling and faking. It was a perfect method for government work. And so that same year, he became head of the Council of Economic Advisors for Richard Nixon. In 1974, he urged President Ford to propose a new tax as a means of combating inflation. He was involved in the Whip Inflation Now campaign, complete with its win buttons, though he knew full well that the real culprit was not a lack of morale in the population, but a Fed that would not stop the printing press. A few years later, he winnowed his way into the Reagan inner circle and became head of the Social Security Commission. He urged dramatically increased payroll taxes, perhaps the reason he was appointed and they were imposed. All of this was mere prelude to 1987, when the goal of his career was at hand. He was nominated for the position he'd been training for almost his whole life, head of the Fed. What happened soon afterwards was the famous stock market crash of 1987. Here he did what he would do again and again during his 20-year tenure. He opened up the monetary spigots. He did it again and again. Monetary pumping was his one weapon. To take just some of the examples of the Mexican debt crisis of 1996, the so-called Asian contagion of 1997, long-term capital management in 1998, the Y2K crisis of 1999 and 2000, the dot-com collapse, and finally the 9/11 terrorist incidents in Washington and New York. Oh, never forget that Greenspan on November 13th, 2001 was awarded the Enron Prize. Essentially, he proved himself adept at serving the state whenever it needed help. Politicians use Greenspan as what Sheehan calls their air raid shelter. He did them a favor, and they returned it by appointing him again and again. And they fawned over him as few have been fawned over. And it's no wonder he was history's biggest counterfeiter. You can see the map of this in the federal funds rate. Looking at the chart from the 60s to the present, we see a huge arch with a peak in 1979 and the rate trending steadily downward to the present level of 0. The only way this could be justified would be through large increases in savings and capital. We've not seen this. A picture of lower and lower rates is wholly artificial, and of course it's also bubble-inducing in the extreme. What we are experiencing now in the U.S. and elsewhere is a direct result of Greenspan's tenure, which led to the greatest financial catastrophe in modern times. And make no mistake, every bit of it can be blamed on Alan Greenspan. We know from the on-record reports of everyone who has worked with him that he ruled the Federal Open Market Committee meetings with an iron fist, never seeking anyone else's opinion, nor tolerating dissent to his political intuitions. He would beat back any contrary views with withering stares and implicit and explicit rebukes. It was ruled by fear and intimidation, thanks to his political connections. He could make or break people. He also continued to cultivate his public image as a way of crushing disagreements within the Fed. The message he sent through his high status was, "Don't you dare disagree with this God on earth whom all people adore." For a time we had the entire Wall Street and Washington establishment singing one long united chorus of the hymn, "Thank God for Greenspan." He encouraged this, sending his minions out to tell the press that he deserved credit for all good things: an uptick in employment, a downtick in the trade deficit, an optimistic earnings report from Wall Street. No matter what the news, he would take credit for it. Those were crazy times. An article appeared in the New Republic magazine that told of a cult on Wall Street involving candles, incense, and iconic Buddha-like images of Greenspan in the back rooms of big firms. The story was preposterous, like so much in the New Republic, but believable. It took some time before anyone figured out that it was fake. I don't need to tell you how the story of Greenspan ends. His world came crashing down around him. He spends his time today trying to explain his way out of the blame. Much to his everlasting disgrace, he has intimated on many occasions that the meltdown was not his fault, nor a failure, of course, of the government, but a result of inherent flaws in the market. Ayn Rand speculated that this undertaker might just be a social climber. She did not and could not have known that he would eventually climb his way all the way to the top, fall all the way to the bottom, and while writhing in shame, would betray the entire cause to which he pretended devotion. But anyone who looked at his life could see the pattern. It was not a complex one. He served the state. As Rothbard himself wrote, quote, "Greenspan's real qualification is that he can be trusted never to rock the establishment's boat." Indeed, he served the establishment from the first day to the last. Now I'd like to turn back to Rothbard and his life. When we last left him, he had just completed his dissertation. He was about to embark on a great journey that would consume his entire life. He published in the established journals as long as he could, but at some point his quest for truth and love of liberty meant he would be cut off from them. Despite his brilliance and his credentials, he did not get a prestigious university post. He worked for a private academic foundation, reviewing all the latest books on U.S. history, philosophy, law, and economics. His massive treatise on economics that appeared in 1963 began as a tutorial written on behalf of that foundation. When he did get a position, it was at Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute. It was not in an economics department, but rather, as Joe Salerno pointed out, in the Department of Social Sciences. There was one other economist on the faculty, a communist. He had a dumpy office, he had a bad salary, and mostly uninterested students who were all engineering majors. But it hardly mattered to him. He had the freedom to write and publish and tell the truth, and that's what he wanted more than anything. And yet even here his options were limited. As a brilliant supporter of the free market, one might think that conservative journals of opinion would be open to him. But soon after the Cold War intensified, he could not be quiet on an issue of vast importance to him, namely the relationship between liberty and military expansionism. He saw the warfare state as nothing but a species of socialism, and he adhered to the credo of the old classical liberals, a free market plus an international outlook of peace. For this, he was excommunicated by the conservatives. The result was that he ended up building his own global movement, and one that began in his living room. His 24 books and literally thousands of articles ended up inspiring a vast worldwide movement for liberty. His economic writings bridged the gap between Mises and the current generation of Austrians and added mightily to the edifice. His wonderful personality demonstrated to one and all that it is possible to have fun while fighting Leviathan. As for Rothbard's own character, the contrast with Greenspan could not be starker. If Greenspan was the dreary undertaker, Rothbard was the happy warrior. Rothbard thrilled to spend time with students, faculty, anyone interested in liberty and Austrian economics. When you spoke to him, he was glad to talk about the field of interest that was the other person's specialization, whether it was history, philosophy, ethics, politics, Baroque church architecture, religion, music, sports, or even the soaps on TV. He always made others feel important. He was always excited to give credit to others and draw attention to the contribution of everyone to the great cause. He never held a grudge for long. Even for those who betrayed him personally, there was always an opportunity for reconciliation. All of these traits derive from his amazing generosity of spirit, to which I attribute his love of truth above all else. His too short life was cut off in 1995, but that was also the year that the web browser became common in offices and homes. Those classes that Rothbard taught in his small New York classroom and later at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, are now being broadcast around the world through iTunes and Mises.org. His books are all in print and selling as never before. There are not only his books, but books on his books, and an entire literature growing up around his legacy. Some have said that Rothbard was his own worst enemy. People said the same of Mises. The idea here is that they could have helped their career by going along to get along. And of course that's true enough. But is going along all we really want out of life? Or do we want to make a difference in a way that will outlast us? At some point in our lives, we will all come to the realization that all the money and all the power we can accumulate will be useless after we die. The legacy we will leave on this earth comes down to the principles by which we lived. It is the ideas we hold and the way we pursued them that is the source of our immortality. Greenspan will leave an economy in shambles and a lifetime of pandering. Rothbard left a grand vision of liberty united with science and an example of what it means to truly think long term. In all ages and in all times, people must make a choice. Will we accept the world as it is and try to fit in, getting as much as we can from the system until we bow out? Or will we stick to principle, pay the price that involves, and leave the world a better place? I submit to you that anyone who has ever truly loved liberty has chosen the second course. This is the course that the two Mises Institutes are dedicated to following. May we all individually make that same decision. Thank you.